So this is the session related with macroeconomic models, and we're going to start talking about our basic tool of analysis for the remaining of the term, which is the aggregate demand and aggregate supply model. We're going to start from scratch, from the basics, and then we're going to keep building the ideas because this topic has to do with different schools of thought. And by now, I would expect that you have read the small document that I sent you, which is related with the neoclassical school of thought and the Keynesian school of thought. And even if we are not going to review that in depth, also to have in perspective that there's also the Marxist school of thought. These three ideas are going to be relevant when we make a particular analysis of macroeconomic policies, but also of macroeconomic analysis per se. So let me just share the screen. Okay, so the first thing that we want to start approaching is what are the goals or what is the main goal of a government inside a country? And again, remember that we are looking at the economic perspective. So the question, what are the main economic goals of a government? When we talk about the economic goals, when we need to go back to our idea of what is the economic problem? So a society organizes and then it establishes a government from the economics perspective to make sure that the population satisfies their needs. We may say that's the basic idea and the most simplified concept that we may talk when we talk about the basic problem of economics, approach it from the government perspective. So the discussion actually nowadays goes around what is the role of the government trying to pursue that idea of solving the economic problem. So trying to satisfy the needs and wants with scarce resources. So there are questions that may appear here, which is who should produce actually? Should the firms produce goods and services? Should the government actually intervene and produce the goods and services and distribute them directly? How to make sure that people are going to be satisfied? How can we ensure as a human body that everyone is satisfied? And again, all these discussions about equity and efficiency, what is more efficient and what is more equitable? Sometimes it is even we may say self-excludable answer. You may be efficient, but efficiency doesn't mean that everyone is going to be able to receive everything compared to just distributing everything equally, but that's not efficient because some people may not need what they are receiving. Come back to our first class. Remember when we were distributing donuts or cakes amongst the population. So we're going to try to look at a framework which is a basic market-based economic structure. So under that idea of we are talking about a liberal world in which the markets are prevailing, our discussion now doesn't go beyond the model. We're not really discussing the economic model, but we are assuming that the structure is a market-based economy. So there's a general consensus about four main macroeconomic goals. And these are how to be achieved and what makes the difference. Now, the goal itself is the first one, to enhance economic growth. And that means producing more goods and services over time, because we learned that, first of all, population keeps increasing. Secondly, goods are limited compared to our wants and needs. So growth should ensure that more goods and services are provided as long as there's demand for those goods. And producing those goods also allows people to be better off. Better off in terms of having more satisfiers for the needs and wants of people, but on the other hand, better off in terms of the money that is being produced is going to help people to have a source of income so they can actually buy in the market whatever they need and they think they want that is important for them. So economic growth is an interesting one because we may say, well, how much to grow? Should we grow fast? Should we go slow? Should we actually grow at all? Or we can just have a sustained level of production which is not really increasing over time. So all of those are questions that are now more contemporary about sustainable growth. But let's keep with economic growth as one of the goals. The other goal is to reduce unemployment. That means that the government should pursue the full use or the best use of factors of production. And when we're talking about employment, we're not talking about only people, but also resources, okay? Not factors of production. Now, we are gonna learn, or we have discussed before, that one of the most flexible factor of production is labor. So you can have a piece of land and you may add more labor into that piece of land in a very basic idea. So the government would like to make sure that most of the people, if not all of them, who are available to work are working. Because once you are working in a market-based economy, that means that you have a source of income. Now we're going to extend that to the use of factors of production itself, because if you are underusing your ability to produce, then you are again working beyond efficiency, and that is one of the things that we will discuss when we talk about the role of the government would be to enhance efficiency by making sure that employment of FOPs is reaching its maximum capacity, as long as that's also defined as sustainable if the society decides to do so. So we did this, say, reduce unemployment or pursue the full employment level of a country. The other one is the price stability, okay? So we're talking about avoiding inflation rates that are beyond of control. We will define price stability as a certain level of inflation that is healthy for an economy, and we will discuss that later, what means healthy or not. Maintain external balance, and we will talk about it. Remember, we said a country does not work in autarky. A country has connections with the rest of the world. Now, more than ever, the world is globalized, so we rely on other parts of the world. The supply chain, meaning how the production is going on, is also international. So trying to maintain a balance that allows the country to have a healthy relationship with the rest of the world in monetary terms, meaning you have enough money to keep buying raw materials and produce and selling goods to the rest of the world, for example. Or you may talk also about an external balance that allows a country to have a sustainable level of debt, because that could be another thing. You may be indebted with the rest of the world. You need to pay back the debt. So the external balance talks about all these different issues. So we call it external equilibrium, and mostly is related with our equation of X minus M. Remember, exports minus imports. But when we go next year, we will go deeper and we'll see that it's not only exports minus imports, but has to do also with the flows of financial cash that is flowing around, the flows of loans, for example, the flows of buying and selling assets between countries. All of that is going to be related with the external balance. Now, there's a fifth macroeconomic goal, which is controversial, okay? Some of us wish that this could be a consensus, but some of us may say, no, it's not possible to have a consensus about this under a market-based economy. And that is the reducing income inequalities. Now, that's a big discussion also, because that has to do with how income is distributed in an economy, and how that distribution of incomes may be not necessarily fair. We put the word fair, but also may lead to other market imperfections. Again, remember we talk about asymmetric information that could be related with the redistribution of income. We may talk about inefficiencies taking place because people who are not able to produce as much as they can because they are not able to have access to factors of production. That would be something that is actually challenging the efficient way of producing in a country because of the inequalities that are embedded in a country. But all of that is a debate, because some schools of thought may say the government should pursue equality. And some other schools of thought may say the government shouldn't mess with inequality because markets are unequal. Actually, markets are focused on distributing goods and services, not on equalizing everyone to have the same income. So we have a very philosophical perspective here of this goal. So we cannot say that it's a consensus, but again, we can put it as a fifth macroeconomic goal as long as we explain that there's a controversy here. It's not a consensus. So not even 100 years ago, in the USA, the system of national accounts was created, okay? Everything that we have been discussing about how to measure inflation, how to measure the GDP, how to put the employment levels, how to analyze an economy using a particular model, actually was born 100 years ago in a more systematic way, using the system of national accounts. And we use that for economic analysis using the concept of aggregate. So aggregate means the sum of all the components. So we're not talking about just a particular market, but we're talking about the aggregate of the markets within an economy. So aggregate demand, as we have defined it so far, is a total planned expenditure, because we're talking about the year itself. So we may analyze the total demand that is planned to happen in a year on goods and services produced in an economy. And remember that we said that the aggregate demand is not only made by households, but we have our function of AD. So we said households consume, and that's our big C. And then we have also the investment, which is firms consume, and also the government consumes. And at the end of the day, we have also countries living in a world, in a globalized world. So we have the exports minus imports. So that would be the net export function, which means also the rest of the world consumes. So everything that is demanded from our production is from households, from firms, from government, and from the rest of the world. Okay, so that's what we have defined as the aggregate demand in an economy. And we said that if the economy is in general equilibrium, that will mean that everything that is being produced is being consumed, okay? So we may say the GDP produced is actually bought by all these different agents, economic agents, so we call it a macroeconomic equilibrium when production means consumption. So when aggregate demand means the national income of the country, that's what we're talking about, general equilibrium. When the aggregate demand is also the national expenditure of a country, and when the aggregate demand means also the national output of a country. So all of these, remember, are the different ways of measuring the GDP. If the GDP means what we have produced, means what we have consumed, and that also means that if we were able to consume it, means that we were having income to consume it. So we have the three approaches here saying the economy is at equilibrium when what we produce has been consumed and what we spend actually is what we earn, okay? And of course, I'm saying consumption of households plus the injections. You remember we already have discussed about IG and X minus M being the net injections of an economy. So let's start with to understand our macroeconomic model by defining the aggregate demand curve. So I want to stop 1 second here to see from the beginning, how are we going to graph the aggregate demand of an economy? Just to note, this is not just the market of pencils. This is not just the market of cars. This is the total market of everything that is going to be consumed in an economy and produced in an economy. So we have a different way of looking at this graph. So we don't have a single price, but as you were guessing, this is actually the price level of the economy. Remember that we measure the price level using the CPI. We also measure the price level using the GDP deflator. Okay, so this could be indexes that we are assuming that in the model are reflected in our y-axis, okay? So think about the price level of all the prices of the economy reflected on the y-axis. What do you think is going to be then portrayed in the x-axis? It's not just the production of flowers in a country, is not the production only of tourism in a country, but actually it's the production of everything that this country produces. So remember, this is the GDP, or we may say this is the real GDP to be more accurate. So real GDP is important to write here. Or if you want to put here also as a label, this is the national income of the economy. Because we said that if we're measuring this in monetary terms, that means that this is the GDP or the output of goods produced, but also is the national income that people receive by selling what is being producing, okay? So it's either GDP or national income. Some books actually put it as real output. What we want to make sure is that we're not writing just Q. Remember that Q is just quantity of goods, but we're talking about the whole economy. We're not talking about just a quantity of goods of a particular market. So that's how we differentiate quantity micro versus macroeconomic analysis here. Good. Let's clean this 1 second and let's keep moving on. So the aggregate demand actually has a slope, and the slope, as you will maybe think, has also a negative relationship between the price level and, in this case, the real output or the real GDP. So how are we going to be, just gonna write here GDP, real, okay? How are we going to be analyzing our aggregate demand curve? This is the demand curve of the whole economy. And remember that we always want to make sure that we explain that this is C plus I plus G plus net exports, okay? Or X minus M, that could be here, X minus M. But in net exports could be also written. So if we have the whole demand of the economy and the price level here, we have a reason, actually we have a couple of reasons why we have a negative slope here, okay? This is not only related with the micro concept of the law of demand, but think about how the price level affects the real income of people. So real income of people means, just gonna write it here, the real income of people means that the income without the inflation, or in other words, the purchase power of their income. Think about inflation. If the goods and services in an economy are increasing its prices, okay? Remember, we're talking about the total prices of the economy. This is the price level. So if all the goods or most of the goods, or if we can just put a basket, the goods that we buy generally in our economy keep increasing their prices, then what happens with our real income? Well, our real income actually loses purchase power. Because if we are earning $100 per month, but now the prices of the goods went to $120 per month, now we are losing income if before the prices were reflecting the 100, just to put a simple number here to compare. So inflation was taking place here between these two values, but the income remained stable. So that means that when the price level goes up, think about now our graph. If we go here, when the price level goes up, inflation is taking place, isn't it? Now we said that pi is inflation. So how that may affect the production of goods and services, or in this case, the consumption of goods and services, because we're talking about the aggregate demand. So because this is GDP, or this is production and consumption of all goods and services, what's happening is that now, because of the price level going up, people in this country have less disposable income, less real income. Now goods and services are more expensive. So people will consume less because their income does not allow them to consume the same amount, because the purchasing power of its currency or its money is lower. Okay, I want to make sure that we understand this is not the law of demand. This is the purchasing power of income decreases and people are then buying less goods and services. The other reason why the slope of the aggregate demand is also negative, we may go also both ways, going down or going up. Think about if, think about, because we're talking about the endogenous change in the price level. So let's say if the prices are going down, okay, in the economy, for some reasons, the price level went down, there's deflation. Just to change the idea of inflation all the time, let's look at the opposite. Now deflation was taking place. So because the price level of the economy, think about all the goods and services of this economy are decreasing. It's not just the, Coca-Cola getting cheaper and the rest of the goods being the same. No, this is all the economy having lower prices in the economy. That's the endogenous variable. So that will mean that more people are willing to buy these type of goods that are produced in this economy, thinking about if this was producing Coke and was producing also cars and was producing also food, all of it is being producing more due to the lower price level of the economy. But the reason is not, again, because it's just cheaper. But the reason is, one, now we said the real income increases, so we have more money to buy more goods. But also we call it also the import substitution effect. So that means that the foreigners are going to find cheaper to buy goods that are produced locally than the goods that are produced away. So that means that we will produce more goods because it's cheaper to buy our local goods in general than the foreign produced goods. So lower price level means higher GDP or higher level of consumption, because now people are finding it cheaper to buy them in our own economy instead of buying them abroad. So these are reasons why we have the aggregate demand having a downward slope. So I'm gonna just show here what is written in our theory. Just want to make sure that we understand that AD is different than just the demand of just one market. So this is what we're talking about. Real income effect: when price level falls, real income rises. Real balance effect, well, this is another one I didn't talk. The real balance is actually the third reason why this is having a negative slope. And we call it real balance because now people find that if the price level are falling, for example, again, we can use the going upwards, but let's use the example of falling down. Now people will find that leaving their money in their bank is making them to lose money, because now goods and services are cheaper. So you don't want to keep your money in the bank if now you can buy more goods and services because your income is higher, your real income is higher. So that's called the real balance effect. People switching from savings to consumption, okay? People are withholding from their savings and they are using that money for consuming more, because now, generally speaking, all goods and services that people consume overall are cheaper. So that makes the aggregate demand to be having this additional level of consumption, okay? And the third reason was the international substitution or import substitution effect, which means that higher local prices, for example, if that was the case going up, if we are facing inflation, people will switch and will start to buy foreign goods and the GDP will be reduced, or the opposite. If our goods are cheaper, then people will buy local goods instead of buying the foreign goods. That's called the international substitution effect. Okay, let's move on. Just make a little pause here. Okay, our next, our next part of our analysis in the model is the other side of the story, the aggregate supply, okay? Aggregate supply makes our life a little bit more complicated because we will see how the aggregate supply has different approaches. Let's look at the first approach, which we will call it let's define first the aggregate supply, and then the approach will be the short-term aggregate supply. So the aggregate supply, as it says, is the total supply of goods and services provided or produced by a national economy during a specific time period. Okay, just so you may have the question right now, well, is this GNP or GDP? So far, we can stick with the idea of the GDP. So everything that is being produced inside the boundaries of a country, okay? So it shows the ability and propensity of firms to put goods in the market at a certain price level. So actually the price level has to do with producing more or less of goods and services in the economy. And that is going to be related again with the whole amount of prices of the economy, not just the prices of the goods that I produce. Remember, you were saying, well, if I produce, if the face masks right now are more expensive because people are demanding it more, then if I'm a producer of face masks, I want to sell more of those. I want to produce more of those. That's why you see in the news that now almost every factory is producing face masks. I heard also that even the chocolate industry, the ones who produce Hershey's chocolates, they are dedicating a part of their factories to produce face masks. Of course, they are not giving them away. They want to sell them to the governments because there's a demand of those goods. So if they can make money out of it, they will do it. Now, that is not the case with the aggregate supply. The aggregate supply is talking about the whole price level of the economy. So the question is, why firms would like to produce more if the whole economy is having actually higher prices? So we have an argument of why there's a positive slope in the short run for firms to produce more when the price level of the economy is going up. Not just the prices of the goods that they produce, but everything that they are producing and consuming in an economy. So our first fact is that the short run will define the aggregate supply with a positive slope, okay? We will define the short run in a few minutes as something interesting because short run could be 5 years, could be 1 year, could be 5 minutes. But the definition of the short run here is the context of how long does the economy take to reach a new equilibrium, okay? So the shock creates a space of time in which the economy is not able to reach an equilibrium. Okay, think about when there's a shock, how long does it take to go to the new equilibrium? So in that case, we are going to be talking about the short run and the long run as when the economy reaches, I'm going to use a very simple micro, this is micro diagram, showing if there's a shock that is shifting, let's say shifts the demand out. So from the former equilibrium to the new equilibrium, okay? So we have here this period of time that is allowing the economy to adjust to the new normal, okay? And that time to adjust to the new normal is what we call actually the short run. Let's move on because this is a very theoretical concept and it's kind of dense, but we want to actually make sure that we got it. Now, in the long run, there's a big controversy about the macroeconomic aggregate supply curve. And actually, we will see how this becomes so interesting because this controversy is still going on nowadays. There's no one school of thought that has overcome the other school of thought. That has to do with the ideological view of the markets in the long run, okay? We will see that in 1 second. You will see how this gets. So this is mostly, the long run is mostly related with these readings that I gave to you that are confronting two big schools of thought. We're gonna simplify the schools of thought by calling one of them the Keynesian school of thought, which is how it is called. The other one is the one that has a little bit more of categories or subcategories, but it's called the neoclassical, okay? So we're gonna simplify it by calling it the neoclassical school of thought, but this has other subs, let's say sub schools or sub fields of study. We have the monetarist here. We have the Chicago School, which is related with the monetarist. We have the laissez-faire school of thought that is more radical. We have the Austrian school of economics, because the Austrian is a little bit beyond the neoclassicals, but all of these has to do with a certain view of the economy, which is not the same as the Keynesians. Okay, let's move on. So we're going to try to explain this graph that I hope it looks complicated enough for you, so you will find challenging, and then you will be happy to say, I understood it, and now I can explain this graph. Okay, so let's define what we will call real wages. Real wages are related with the price level of the economy and are related with the aggregate supply in the short run. So let's right now talk about the short run of the economy. Later we will discuss more about the difference between short run and long run. The explanation will make us understand why are we talking about the short run, okay? So let's look at these three graphs. The first graph is talking about the demand of labor. Think about a demand curve. Let's forget about the shape. This could be a straight line. But this is a demand curve of labor. So what are we talking here about? This is the number of workers, quantity of labor in an economy. This could be an industry or could be the whole economy. And this is actually the wages, okay? Wages means the salary of what people earn by working on a particular area. So wages are reflected in monetary terms, again. And this is the number of workers, QL, or we can call it N as it is in this book. So let's look at this graph. Let's say W means the wages, but the important thing is that these wages are already deflated. So this is the real wages. So in other words, what we are talking about, we're saying that wages are staying, or the wages that were reflected here, they are already taking away the effect of inflation, okay? Let's move on, and then we'll come back to this. If you have questions about this, you will understand it when we move on. Otherwise, you can ask questions. So let's go to the other panel here. Production function, okay? The production function is telling us on the y-axis, we have the level of production or the level of output of a country or a firm. And this is the number of workers, quantity of labor again. Remember, we talked about the Solow model of growth, and we said, given a certain period of time and giving a certain factors of production that are fixed, if we keep adding another flexible factor of production, then production will increase. This is what this graph is telling us. With a certain given FOPs, and think about FOPs being fixed, we are having a certain amount of workers, let's call it N0. So N0 is also here, N0, okay? This amount of workers, N0, are going to be producing a certain level of output, okay? These workers produce this GDP, if we're talking about the whole economy as the total output here. Now, let's move to the third panel, okay? Later, we will discuss all of these, what's happening, but let's just understand each of the panels. Now, this is our aggregate supply function, the one that we are studying right now. Let's call it AS in the short run. So SRAS, short run aggregate supply. Now, let's see what's happening here. What we have here is Y, or output, okay? National output is the same as national output here. So if we're talking about this economy is producing a certain amount of goods and services reflected in money, this could be reflected in money, this could be reflected in amount of goods, it doesn't really matter for the sake. Let's say Y1 is this, or no, sorry, Y0 is also Y0 here. So this level of output, Y0, was produced by having hired this level of workers, didn't it? So N0 produced Y0. So if we go here and we draw Y0, but now we're putting Y0 at a certain price level. Okay, now we're connecting everything. If we start looking at the economy by the price level of the economy was this amount, I'm going to simplify things by saying maybe this price level was at the level 100 using our consumer price index base 100. So let's say the price level was this number 100. At this price level, the economy was producing Y0 amount of GDP, okay? Now, in order to produce Y0, we needed to have a certain amount of workers. Let's go back to this panel, okay? So Y0 was produced by N0 workers. Now, how much did it cost to hire N0 workers? Let's go to this panel. N0 workers, according to this demand curve, was saying people were willing to hire N0 workers at these wages, okay? Let's put numbers. Maybe the wages were $20 per hour. Let's just put a single average here. The whole economy was paying $20 per hour to the workers. The workers, the firms were able to hire this amount of workers at $20 per hour, okay? This is actually the point of $20 per hour. And this amount of workers were producing this amount of GDP, okay? And this amount of GDP is what we have here at this price level that we have discussed so far. Okay, let's make this graph dynamic. So let's look at a change here on the price level. My assumption is going to be, first of all, you can discuss later. We can discuss later why the CPI went up, but I want just to look at the relationship between higher prices and more production first. Let's say that the price level went up. Now the CPI was 103, let's say. Again, now we understand when the CPI goes 103, there was inflation taking place, didn't it? So now the CPI changed and the price level of the economy reflects higher prices overall of the economy, P1, 103. Now let's look why the high price level is telling us that the economy is willing to produce and actually is producing Y1 or more GDP, okay? GDP1 or Y1 from the former one. What we want to explain is why this higher price level increases the production of the economy. The argument is what we will discuss in macroeconomics as the real wage effect. Let's go to the panel 1 and let's see what's happening. So what this is telling us is that firms are willing to produce more, okay, when there is inflation, as long as the wages are fixed. How that can happen? If the price level is going up and the wages that the firms are paying are fixed, that means that the firms have an incentive to produce more. We are saying that the GDP increased, and in order to increase the GDP, firms needed to hire more workers, didn't they? This is what the production function tells us. To produce more GDP, you need to hire more workers. Now, this additional amount of workers were hired because firms were willing to demand more workers, okay? So this is N1, more workers, N1, at the same wages, okay? If the wages were increasing, that would be a different situation, but we're saying firms are producing this amount with higher workers as long as the wages are stable. The question is why the wages are stable. So the wages are stable because so far we are talking about the short run. The short run tells us wages are not already adjusted to the new price level. Interesting point. So I'm gonna put it an example in real life so you will see that happening. Let's say that tomorrow or the next week, the prices of the economy in Canada, okay, go from 100 to 105. Let's just put an example here. Let's say between a week, if I go to the market next week and I buy the same amount of stuff, let's say that now I have to pay 105 instead of 100. And let's say that in 1 month, this keeps increasing. And let's say that you are the ones who are going to the market. And instead of paying $100 for whatever you need for eating and going to the movies or whatever you buy, buying your Netflix, whatever you're buying, now it's going to be 120. Let's say the inflation has been taking place. This is the dynamics of inflation. Prices go up, and prices go up when you go to the market and you pay for them. Now we're making an assumption here, and the assumption is in this week and in this month, even if the prices were increasing, I'm assuming that my salary is fixed, which is true. The college pays me a certain amount of money per month, okay? So because I earn a certain amount of money per month, it doesn't mean that I earn less or I earn more 1 month, but I earn the same amount. Let's assume that my salary per month is now, in this example, is also 100, okay? So my wage per month is 100, but when I go to the market, I pay 105 and I pay 120. Now, interesting because we're talking about production of goods and services. And we're talking about the whole production of goods and services in the economy. That means that the firms are profiting by not adjusting my salary. If you or your salary or whoever's salary we're talking here about, how are they profiting? Well, if they are working for the Coca-Cola company, and if they are working for the, I don't know, Walmart, and they are working for producing cars, whatever is being produced, they say these people are working for them. They are producing more, but when the firms and the Coca-Cola is selling Coca-Colas, they are selling at a higher price. The Walmart is selling at a higher price. The farms are selling at a higher price, but they are paying the workers the unadjusted wages to inflation. They haven't been able to adjust the wages to the new higher prices, okay? Even myself, if I go to the market and I go and buy at 105 and next month I find at 120, well, I still will realize that my wages are below the prices. And maybe I should just go and negotiate with the college to say, well, you know, you have to adjust my prices up to 120 because otherwise I'm losing money, I'm losing purchase power. And they will say, yeah, we will adjust it you next month. But in between, the markets are not adjusted yet. So we have the short run taking place until my wages are adjusted to the new inflation rate. What happens is that usually that adjustment takes place after each year. Each year, the contracts are renovated with the new price level, okay? That is what happens overall in economies. And that is how, when this theory was developed, this was the general, we may say, performance of an economy. Wages were fixed in the short run because of contracts, okay? So actually contracts make the short run to happen because they are not adjusted automatically to the new price level. If they were, then wages would be changing every second, every minute. Let's say tomorrow the prices are going up, the wages go up. Tomorrow the prices go down, wages go down. But that doesn't happen at the same time. There's first prices go up and then the wages are adjusted. prices go down, and then wages are adjusted down. And they are adjusted by renegotiating the contract based on the inflation rate of each year. So, given all that information and all these different graphs, what this is telling us is that because wages are not adjusted for inflation yet, we are defining the short run. We are saying markets are not adjusted yet because there's a discrepancy between someone that is producing and what is being produced. So in that case, there's an incentive for firms to hire as much as possible more workers at the fixed price. In other words, as prices of workers are fixed, okay? That means that more firms, or the demand curve is shifting out, okay? Demand of workers or demand of labor is shifting out. That means more workers being working. That means more workers producing more. And that higher level of production means higher GDP, okay? All this explanation helps us to understand why the aggregate supply curve in the short run, or when we say when the wages are not adjusted yet, has a positive slope towards the price level, okay? Has a positive slope in relation with the price level of the economy. Inflation takes place, that is giving incentives for firms to produce more as long as the wages haven't been adjusted. And that, as long as the wages haven't been adjusted, is what is defining the short run, okay? Once the wages have adjusted, the short run does not take place anymore. That is the new long run, okay? And that's actually not reflected in the slope of this curve, but it's going to be reflected as this curve shifting, because that's when the markets are adjusted in the long run. But that's a different situation. Want to see if there are questions? And then we will move on. So let me clean these. Okay, so just once you are worried right now because you may say, oh, I didn't get anything of what Samuel was just saying here. I hate all these diagrams and I'm not gonna study economics anymore in my life. Well, no, that's not really what I want you to think, because you are not going to be required to explain this panel that I just showed you. The panel was just to explain what otherwise is a very complicated thing to explain just using one diagram, okay? Or maybe I made it more complicated, but you are intelligent people and I know you got it. And if you didn't get it, you can ask questions, that's fine. So at the end of the day, what we have is a curve like this, which is the aggregate supply curve. Let's call it IAS. And let's add is the short run aggregate supply. So it's the aggregate supply curve in the short run, price level, and what do we have here? GDP, okay? Sometimes instead of GDP, I just write Y because that means national income, okay? National income, which is the same thing. So now we know that the GDP in the short run keeps increasing as long as there's a certain level of inflation, because inflation in the short run provides incentives for firms to produce more, as we have been discussing so far. Ceteris paribus, there's nothing else affecting the GDP, but just inflation taking place, and that is making firms willing to hire more workers, producing more goods, as long as they don't have to adjust their wages for the new price level, but they can sell at higher prices whatever they are producing. Now, there are exogenous or external determinants of the aggregate supply, okay? Remember that the short-run aggregate supply, the endogenous factor is the price level of the economy, okay? But the exogenous factor of the aggregate supply are different factors which are Cost of production, technological changes, education and training, infrastructure of the country, or infrastructure of the firms inside the country producing, tax regime and subsidies, capital stock available, if there's more or less capital stock, because who is producing? Firms, and firms will be producing more or less as a function of more capital goods, which is actually what they use to produce more goods. There's availability of loans, for example, or financial capital. If a firm is able to get more money via loans, or maybe there's a stock market that is a functioning stock market, they will be able to receive more money as financial capital to keep producing more and more over time, or to invest more in machinery or training their people, etc. Productivity. So if a firm is able to produce more output per unit of labor, or more output per unit of capital, or more output per unit of land, that will mean productivity increasing. And of course, the labor market. If more people are joining the labor market and those people are going to be hired, that will mean aggregate supply shifting in or out, in this case, out. So think about all of these exogenous factors are actually related with factors of production that the firms use overall in an economy, and how those factors of production are making the production more or less over time. So we call it productivity of an economy. The productivity of the economy is mainly related with all of these different exogenous shocks that are going to be benefiting the production of an economy exogenously, or even the opposite, okay? Maybe less of these will be making the AS in the short run to shift inwards, okay? So thinking about a diagram here, I'm just gonna make a simple diagram. We have the short run aggregate supply. This could shift out or shift inwards depending on the shocks that are affecting the whole economy. Remember, we're talking about the whole economy, not just one sector. So let's think about a shock. Let's say cost of production. What's a main driver of the cost of producing anything? Well, it could be the cost of labor, okay? If wages are increasing, then we may expect the short-run aggregate supply to shift inwards, because now it's more costly to hire workers. Remember, now we're saying the cost of labor is increasing. It's not the same as the wages being fixed as we talked in the former slide. Here, the wages are flexible. So cost of producing gets higher, SRAS will shift inwards. How about what is happening in the world right now? What is a main driver of production? Well, the price of energy. And if the price of energy, thinking about fossil energy or oil, is falling down, what do you expect that is going to happen with the production of the economy and the productivity as well? Well, now it's going to be, firms are going to be able to produce more because now it's cheaper to produce goods and services by buying cheaper oil. So that means that now the cost of production is reduced. SRAS will shift outwards, okay? We're not talking about the price level changing. We're talking about the price of one of the factors of production that is used overall in the economy being cheaper or being more expensive. So oil shocks usually affect the economy in a big deal, okay? I went to the gas station the other day, and actually I used to fill in my tank with $100. Now I use $45 to fill the tank. So actually oil is really making me to save lots of money. And if I was using my car to deliver pizzas, I have a lower cost of delivering pizzas, so actually I can charge less. And if that is happening overall with everyone in the economy, the whole economy will be producing maybe the same amount at a cheaper price or at the same price. That is shifting out the whole production curve, which is the SRAS. Infrastructure, if let's say if there was no road and now there's a road that facilitates communicating from point A to point B, now it's easier to transport goods from one side to the other side of the country. That will make the short-run agri supply to be shifting out, for example. So infrastructure helps the economy to produce more or faster. And that's what we're talking here as exogenous shocks or external determinants of short-run agri supply. This is exogenous shocks that affect the whole economy. And we will finish today this slide by saying all of these shocks that you can see here are affected by macroeconomic policies. So in other words, the government is able to affect any or all of these, okay? Can put taxes on goods that are needed. It can put a minimum wage here. It can enhance technological progress by funding technological education, for example. It can enhance education or it can hinder education. It can create bridges and roads. So all of this actually is related with government policy. So the government has a lot of control on the production of the economy by the decisions that they take politically. I'll leave this slide here so you can see how factors of production, labor and entrepreneurship, land and capital, can be changing in quantity or quality depending on these different shocks. And these are what we call exogenous shocks of the AS. What would happen in your country if now more people are flowing into in a large proportion and they are actually skilled workers, or even if they are unskilled workers, they start to produce more? Agri supply will shift out overall in the country, for example. That's immigration. So I'm just going to leave this here for you to watch. You can just pause it and then look at these different factors. And remember, one factor is not isolated. All of these factors may be taking place at a particular time, and some of them may take place to one side and the other on the other direction, and that will affect the whole production of the economy. So, next presentation is going to be about the long run. We have now discussed the short run. So if we summarize our agri demand and agri supply, just gonna try to use a clean here. Let's just draw here. We have the GDP, we have the price level, and we have talked about the AD. Remember, I will encourage you, whenever you just draw AD, always add it to its other side, which is CIG and X minus M, okay? If we have this in our mind, then we have this always together, okay? This is already defining AD. And we also talk about the short run agri supply, okay? Straight line, very simple IB style graphs. And what we have here is the macroeconomic equilibrium saying the price level at a certain price level and the GDP at a certain GDP based on this price level is giving us the macroeconomic equilibrium of a country. This is reflecting everything that the country is producing is also consumed, okay? That will be the GDP of a particular country in a particular year. Let's say this is maybe $100 billion in the year 2009 of a particular country. And that was the price level of that year in that country. So it could be demanded less, it could be demanded more, but what is being demanded is actually produced according to our SRAS function. So this is the macro equilibrium GDP zero, let's call it. In the short run, okay? We haven't talked about the long run yet. That's our next topic, and that will be a more throughout or more profound discussion.